afternoon, Chairwoman Sanders and fellow members of the Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee. My name is Megan Hunt, M-E-G-A-N-H-U-N-T, and I'm here today to present LB508, known as the Defend the Guard Bill. This bill I learned about from my friend Senator Conrad, who was approached by some veteran members of the Nebraska Libertarian Party about bringing the bill, but she came up against the 20 bill limit. When I learned about it, I still had some slots for the year, and I thought it sounded like an interesting issue and one worthy of discussion. And the more I learned about it, the more I supported it. And knowing that there are some current and former members of the Nebraska National Guard that wanted a platform to speak about this, I agreed to introduce it. LB508, Nebraska's Defend the Guard bill, is part of a national movement, and bills like this one have now been introduced in 30 states. The intent of the bill is to use states' sovereign authority to restore the constitutionally prescribed balance of war powers between branches of the federal government by requiring a congressional declaration of war in order for Nebraska's National Guard to be sent to active duty combat. In other words, state legislatures can demand that the federal government adhere to requirements for congressional war powers as mandated by Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution. Under this bill, without an official declaration of war by Congress, states don't have to send their resources of guardsmen from being federalized except for training and other limited purposes provided in the Constitution, like responding to domestic threats and emergencies. Since 2001, the U.S. has relied on an authorization of use of military force adopted in the wake of the September 11th terror attacks, adopted by Congress and signed into law by then-President Bush. This AUMF is an option available to Congress that is more politically expedient than a declaration of war, but is also more constitutionally suspect in that it effectively delegates the power of war declaration to the executive branch. This current AUMF from 2001 has been relied upon since 2001 by presidents of both parties to perpetuate the global war on terror, as its broad language gives sweeping authority to the president to, quote, take action to deter and prevent acts of international terrorism. Yet the Constitution plainly requires Congress to declare war before the president can commit troops to any offensive military action. The president, whether Democratic or Republican or whatever, should not be able to unilaterally enter into conflicts and send our guardsmen and women to die in war without a check and balance. The authority to activate and deploy National Guard units rests ultimately with states' governors and with Congress for a handful of constitutionally prescribed purposes. I have an amendment, which I meant to distribute, but I forgot, so let me pass this out. So I have this amendment, AM 599, which strikes some provisions from the introduced version of the bill. And these are parts of the bill that have to do with requiring the governor to review current orders that have placed members of our Guard into active duty combat, to take steps to return them to Nebraska, and to report to the legislature about the review. Those sections requiring the government or the governor to take actions on deployments retroactively are not necessary for accomplishing the true intention of the bill. So just to be clear, the subsections 3 and 4 in the introduced version would be removed under this amendment, and that's what I intend to have happen. It further tightens up definitions in the language to make sure it passes constitutional muster, clarifies the role of Congress and the governor when it comes to calling upon the Guard, and ensures that we are not jeopardizing federal funding for established reasons that the Guard can be federalized by Congress. When a Nebraskan enlists in service in the National Guard, they do not typically envision a life of long-term overseas combat deployments. If they wanted to do that, they could have pursued service in other branches of the armed forces. The Guard is intended to respond to emergencies like natural disasters and to provide homeland domestic support. For international conflicts, the federal government has ample resources to call upon within the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps. The current AUMF is meant to engage active duty military forces specifically trained for combat scenarios, not National Guard units. Yet National Guard played a large role in the war on terror. Guard and reserve units made up about 45% of the total force sent to Iraq and Afghanistan and received about 18.4% of the casualties. Misusing the Guard in a prolonged overseas conflict drains needed resources and prevents them from responding in full force to emergency domestic and state needs, such as floods, storms, and fires here at home. Many Guardsmen and women have shared with me, in their words, that this is not what they signed up for. With LB508, Nebraska can assert our sovereign right as a state to protect our citizen Guardsmen from being dispatched to war. It's a way for us to protect not just our dedicated Guardsmen and women from being sent to fight and die in politically motivated combat based on the whim of a president. It also protects everyday Nebraskans by ensuring that our state's Guard force is available and equipped to readily respond to needs here at home when emergencies arise. Even a couple of weeks ago, wildfires in Senator Jacobson and Senator Storer's districts, McPherson and Custer County, had Nebraska National Guards sent to provide critical aid, something they couldn't have done if they had been deployed overseas. LB 508 does not prevent the deployment of our Guard when national emergency or legitimate need for their aid in combat exists. It's simply affirming Congress's duty as a check and balance to declare war, rather than allowing an executive branch to authorize this unilaterally. If we're going to ask Nebraska's sons and daughters to go abroad and fight, it is appropriate and constitutional for us to first ask and expect a congressional declaration of war. This is something that's gaining attention and momentum nationwide. Virginia's House recently passed it unanimously 99-0 with bipartisan support. When current members of our National Guard and veterans and their family members have come to multiple members of our legislature and asked for this, I think it's important that we hear them out and have this conversation and give it serious consideration. I want to thank the Chadron VFW Post 1375 for passing their resolution unanimously in support of this bill, and the several Marine Corps and Air Force veterans who have fought in combat overseas who have submitted comments in support of this bill too, as well as those who are not able to be here and speak today, because I know there are many who could not make it today. I've also heard from organizers that there is a significant number of current Guardsmen and women who would like to speak in support of this bill, but they are afraid to in fear of retaliation. They are libertarian, conservative, and progressive. They are all honored to serve, and they honor us with their service, and I thank them. I have a few things I might save for my close, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Are there any questions from the committee? Sir Wanowski.
Thank you, Chair Sanders. Thank you, Senator Hunt. So the National Guard has a dual mission, and I don't know if you're aware of that, but we have a mission of, our Guard has a mission of peacetime. We heard about that earlier, floods, wildfires, tornadoes, the cleanup of such things. And the second dual mission is to supplement or to help our active duty who may not have full units at the time, and we assist them in a wartime mission. I understand we do need a declaration, but I also understand that most of the people I've served with were very proud that we had that dual mission, and that might be different with some other veterans, but I just want you to know that there is a lot of people join the Guard for that can help both sides of the fence, if you will.
I understand, and I appreciate their service.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Senator Hunt, for being here. I understand the premise as I read and listened to what you had to say, but it kind of begs a question for me. How would you define the roles and authorities of the Commander-in-Chief of the United States of America?
I think the role of the Commander-in-Chief is defined. They can have the authorized use of military force, and we've had that going since 2001, and we've used that same declaration since 2001 to continue sending Guardsmen overseas. So that's not something that existed before the September 11th attacks. Like, the authorized use existed, but it hasn't been used in that way since then, or before then, I guess. So I guess my intention, and why I don't think this is really a political or partisan issue, is to respect the intention of the framers in the Constitution to make sure that the branch of government that actually represents the people, Congress, has the authority to declare war as declared in the Constitution instead of, one figure at the head of the executive branch.
Okay, then let me just ask you a couple of examples. If you look at the Somali pirates that capture U.S. vessels in the Red Sea, in order to rescue that crew and that vessel that was illegally captured by the pirates, you need to send the military in to go do that. So you're sending them into combat without a declaration of war. And that's the authority of the commander-in-chief, right? So
That's right. What is your question?
can he not do that? I mean, isn't that his authority without the inherent declaration of war to send combat troops into combat?
I think that there have been a lot of deployments of the Nebraska National Guard for overseas missions without a formal declaration of war, notably the Horn of Africa, the Kosovo missions. These are missions that involved armed conflict and would not have been permitted under this bill because there was not a congressional declaration of war.
Okay, but that's the inherent nature of being a guardsman, right? Is that you train in order to augment, as Senator Leonowski said, to augment the active duty force and to assist overcoming power to defeat the enemy. I mean, that's what the Guard is there for, to augment active duty.
Right. I think the disagreement may be in who has the authority to send them and what constitutes a national emergency.
But that inherent power is given
if
to
the
the
Somali
president.
pirates are a national emergency, okay, maybe that's what people are having disagreements about in this case. But in any case, obviously, I appreciate people for their service, for their dedication as service members, and their willingness to put their lives on the line for freedom and of the people in the United States and our national security interests. But I think that the reason this bill, passed unanimously in Virginia, the reason why there's so much support for it from many guardsmen and many people in the military is because they don't want their work to be politicized. They don't want to be used for, missions outside of the scope of their duty.
So I appreciate you saying that, and I truly believe you feel that way. I think, but you made the comment that the guardsman said, this is not what I signed up for. I'm pretty sure full open disclosure with all the guardsmen, when they sign on the dotted line, they raise their hand and get sworn in. They understand that part of their job may be to go into combat to defend, Americans who can't defend themselves, defend American priorities and everything else that is determined by the commander-in-chief.
I did think that sharing that perspective from some guardsmen and women who have shared that with me, the quote, "That's not what I signed up for," I did think that would raise up a red flag for some of you. And I'm saying that's their view. And that's not everybody's view. But I think that the mission of a guardsman and the mission of people in different branches of the military, they are different. And people do select branches of the military and opportunities for public service, whether that's enlisting in Air Force or enlisting in the National Guard, because they have different goals in their life and they have different, it's a different job. So yes, in an emergency, all of these brave service members are willing to put their lives on the line. But I think that there's a lot of people feel like they've been misused in that way.
So I agree with you. This is not a political discussion. This is not a left-right. This is a policy discussion, right? And maybe I'm a one-dimensional, simple kind of guy, right, Senator Kavanaugh. But I think when people raise their right hand and whether they're active duty, they're guardsmen, you have a guy that's a tank driver or a guy that's an artillery or an infantryman. They have to logically, inherently know they're being trained to be tasked to go and execute combat, right? So then it comes down to, from your comments, is who has the authority to do that? And your bill seeks to limit the authority under a very narrow situation, taking away that ability from the president.
I would disagree limit. My bill seeks to clearly define the authority already outlined in the U.S. Constitution.
I guess you and I can agree to disagree.
Yeah.
Thank
If
you,
I
Senator.
may, Senator Hunt, will there others to follow you that are
Certainly.
personally, professionally addressing this issue and the language in your bill?
Certainly.
Thank you. Thank you for trying to answer the questions, but appreciate Senator Hunt, but the hearing is to be able to listen to everyone that proponents and
I was just trying to get clarity.
and I think we'll get that with the other testifiers. Are there any other questions from the committee? See none?
Thank you.
And you'll stay for the, well, you have
Yes,
another.
I have another bill, but I think I'll be able to be back.
Okay, thank you very much. Position comments for hearing record today. Proponents 21, opponents 4, and 1 in the neutral.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you again to all the people who came to testify and share today, and to everybody who came to participate in our hearing today. I also want to thank members of the committee for your time and attention, and also for your service. Senator Lineski, Senator Anderson, Senator McCann, and Senator Werdekamper, your brother, who also served. My brother also serves, and while that's not something I've done, obviously I'm very close to him, and he and I are very different. If you got a problem with me, you might really like my brother, but but he and I are very close, and we learn a lot from each other, and yeah, I'm very grateful to everybody for your service. That's all. One thing I thought was interesting, two proponents of this bill are Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard and U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. They are both proponents of this bill. And also this bill passed out of committee in two of our sister states, in South Dakota and in Wyoming this year. So those are states that will be taking this up with their legislatures in this session as well. That happened in January. One thing I'll note about funding, with the amendment that I passed out, the amendment does remove some of the opposition. I have no doubt that some of the opponents will still be in opposition even with the amendment, but it does address some of the concerns that we heard today. One thing I'll note is that Congress sets the military budget, and that president and military leaders can't slash National Guard funding. And Nebraska's congressional delegation, I think, would be very hard-pressed to authorize any kind of funding cut for the National Guard in Nebraska. Title X is for national defense generally, and the bill doesn't cover Title X deployments for training, humanitarian aid, national disasters, or other non-combat operations. As such, it specifically addresses the deployment of National Guard members to active combat zones, ensuring that such deployments are only authorized with an official declaration of war. No section of Title X permits the President to federalize the National Guard from the state of Nebraska or any other state for peacekeeping or contingency operations. Both imply that combat is imminent, which directly contradicts the purpose of the National Guard under constitutional war powers. The militia was never intended to serve as a standing international security force, and its federalization must adhere strictly to congressionally declared wars and constitutional mandates, and that's the intention of this bill. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. See if there are any questions from the committee. See none?
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you very much, and thank you for introducing LB508. This closes the hearing on LB508.